What if the thing you're most afraid of is actually the doorway to your greatest freedom? Most of us spend our entire lives running from one thought, the thought that one day we're going to die. We don't talk about it at dinner. We change the subject when it comes up. We fill our schedules, our phones, our minds with noise, just to avoid sitting with that one quiet, unavoidable truth. But what if that avoidance is costing us everything? What if the energy we pour into denying death is the very energy that's keeping us from fully living? In Chapter 17 of The Untethered Soul, Michael A. Singer makes a radical claim that contemplating death is not morbid, not depressing, and not something to be feared. It is, in fact, one of the most powerful spiritual practices available to us. This chapter is called simply Contemplating Death, and it might just be the most important one in the entire book. Let's get into it. Singer opens this chapter with something most spiritual teachers tend to soften or sidestep, a direct, unflinching acknowledgement that death is coming for all of us, every single one of us, no exceptions. And yet, despite this being one of the most universal facts of human existence, we treat it like a taboo. We act as if thinking about death will somehow invite it in sooner or make us dark and pessimistic. So we push the thought away, again and again, every time it rises to the surface. But Singer asks us to consider something important. What is the cost of that constant pushing away? What does it take out of us to keep that door bolted shut? His argument is that the act of avoidance itself is exhausting. It's a low-grade, constant tension that runs beneath everything we do. We build our routines, our identities, our relationships, partly as structures that help us not think about mortality. And when something threatens that structure, an illness, a loss, an accident, we feel it as a crisis because it cracks the wall we've built. Singer's invitation in this chapter is simple but profound. Instead of waiting for life to force the subject on us, choose to look at it directly. Contemplating death, deliberately and honestly, is not about being morbid. It's about being real. It's about having the courage to sit with what is true so that you can finally stop spending energy pretending it isn't. Here's where Singer gets really interesting. He points out that our fear of death is not really about death itself, because none of us have experienced it. We can't actually fear something we've never known. What we fear, Singer explains, is losing what we've built here. Our body, our relationships, our reputation, our sense of self, our story. The fear of death is really the fear of losing everything the ego has worked so hard to construct and protect. And this is a profound insight, because it means that when we contemplate death, what we're really doing is shining a light on our attachments. We start to see clearly what we're clinging to and why. We see how much of our daily anxiety is rooted in the desperate attempt to hold things in place, to make sure our body stays healthy, our status stays secure, our relationships stay intact, our image stays intact. Singer isn't saying these things don't matter. He's saying that our grip on them is what causes suffering. And death, or rather the honest contemplation of death, has the power to loosen that grip. Because when you genuinely sit with the reality that all of this will one day be gone, something shifts. The things you were white-knuckling start to feel a little lighter. The identity you were defending starts to feel a little less precious. This is not defeat. This is the beginning of real freedom. Our resistance to death reveals the chains we're wearing, and contemplating death is what lets us finally see them. Singer has spoken throughout The Untethered Soul about energy, specifically the energy of consciousness and how we block it through resistance and fear. Chapter 17 brings that conversation to its most fundamental level. Because if there is one thing we resist more than anything else, it is the reality of our own death. And that resistance, Singer argues, is one of the greatest drains on our spiritual and psychological energy. Think about how much of what you do each day is secretly motivated by a desire to feel permanent, to feel safe, to feel like you're building something that will last. There's nothing wrong with building a life, but when the underlying drive is fear, fear of impermanence, fear of loss, fear of the ending, then nothing we build ever truly satisfies. We finish one thing and immediately reach for the next, hoping that this time it will be enough to quiet the anxiety. It never is. Singer's point is that the energy we pour into denying death, into the relentless project of self-preservation, is energy that could be redirected into presence, into connection, into genuine spiritual growth. Imagine what becomes available when you're no longer spending a significant portion of your inner resources on that background hum of existential avoidance. Contemplating death, far from being a drain on your energy, is actually a way of reclaiming it. When you stop fighting against the inevitable, you stop leaking, and that energy comes back to you, cleaner, freer, and available for something real. One of the most beautiful and counterintuitive ideas in this chapter is that contemplating death doesn't lead you into darkness, it leads you into clarity. Singer describes how facing mortality honestly has a way of cutting through all the noise. When you genuinely hold the awareness that your time here is finite, the trivial starts to fall away on its own. The grudge you've been holding for 3 years, the anxiety about what someone thought of something you said at a party, the need to win an argument that no longer matters. When seen through the lens of mortality, these things lose their grip almost instantly. And what remains, what's left after the trivial falls away, is what actually matters. The love you feel, the moments of beauty, the people you're genuinely connected to, the work that feels meaningful, the quiet mornings and the deep conversations. Singer is pointing to something that philosophers, monks, and spiritual teachers across centuries have all recognized: that death is one of the greatest teachers life offers us, not as a threat, but as a lens. When we allow ourselves the practice of contemplating death with openness rather than terror, we stop sleepwalking through our days. We begin to show up more fully. We make different choices. We stop postponing the things that genuinely matter, and we stop wasting time on the things that don't. This is not pessimism. This is perhaps the most optimistic reframing possible, that death, honestly faced, makes life more vivid, more intentional, and more free. Singer brings this chapter to its spiritual core with a distinction that changes everything: the distinction between the body and consciousness. The body is temporary. That's not a belief or a philosophy, it's simply a fact. But Singer, drawing on the deeper teachings of the book, invites us to consider that consciousness, the awareness that is aware, the witness that watches all of your thoughts and feelings arise and pass, may not be bound by the body in the same way. Throughout the Untethered Soul, Singer has been pointing us inward, toward the awareness behind the mind, behind the thoughts, behind the personality. And in chapter 17 he asks, if you are truly that awareness, if you are the one who watches rather than the one who thinks, then what exactly is it that dies? The body dies, the ego dies, the story dies. But the witness, the pure awareness that you fundamentally are. Singer suggests that this is something of a different nature entirely. Now, you don't need to have this fully resolved philosophically to benefit from the chapter. The invitation is simply to hold the question, to consider that what you are may be larger than what you've assumed. And when that possibility opens, even slightly, the fear of death begins to loosen its hold. Because you realize you may have been fearing the dissolution of something you were never meant to be permanently identified with in the first place. Contemplating death, from this vantage point, becomes less about facing an ending and more about discovering what has always been and always will be beyond it. Thank you so much for spending this time with Chapter 17. Genuinely, this is one of those chapters that asks something of you, and the fact that you stayed with it says something. I'd love to know, is there a specific area of your life where the fear of loss or impermanence is quietly running things for you? Maybe it's a relationship, a career, a version of yourself you're holding on to. Drop it in the comments. I think this is one of those conversations worth having out loud. If this chapter landed for you, subscribe so you don't miss the next summary. We're walking through the Untethered Soul together, and it only gets deeper from here.